My name is Patricia, and I am 61 years old. Throughout my career as a public relations manager, I dedicated myself to meticulously crafting reputations and navigating the most complex narratives for my clients. I balanced this demanding profession while raising 3 children, Jake, Mark, and Lisa, as a single mother for many years before meeting my beloved Arthur. The weight of those responsibilities shaped me into someone who understood both the power of truth and the devastating impact of lies. I endured immense heartache when my eldest son, Jake, abruptly severed all contact with our family 5 years ago, hurling false accusations of favoritism at me, despite my unwavering love and countless desperate attempts to heal our relationship. Then, Arthur, my anchor and greatest love, passed away peacefully. Jake, in a display of callousness that stole my breath, deliberately skipped his stepfather's funeral. Yet weeks later, when the will was read, he materialized like a vulture, demanding his $500,000 inheritance and raging that he was owed far more. His face twisted with entitlement as he screamed about drowning in $250,000 of debt. Without warning, he launched a vicious social media campaign painting me as a monster who had perpetrated neglect, emotional abuse, and toxic manipulation. He even suggested that my supposed cruelty had contributed to Arthur's decline. "You're inhuman," he declared before a growing online audience. "You destroyed our family, my professional reputation, my integrity, Arthur's precious memory, everything I held sacred lay in ruins. I felt utterly abandoned, condemned by my own flesh and blood, drowning in a sea of profound isolation. Yet beneath my overwhelming despair, something fierce began to stir. As a crisis communications expert, I possessed an unwavering commitment to uncovering truth that ran deeper than my pain. What Jake, his manipulative lawyer, Mr. Davies, and the growing online mob spreading his poison didn't realize was the extent of my preparation. Years of meticulous journaling had documented every one of Jake's previous accusations, his disturbing behavior patterns, his reckless financial decisions. More crucially, hidden security cameras throughout our home had captured Jake's explosive confrontations with both Arthur and me, revealing the true nature of his character. My trusted cyber forensics ally stood ready to act. This time, his web of lies wouldn't merely unravel. It would expose the depth of his cruelty, restore Arthur's untarnished legacy, and reclaim my dignity, though the cost would prove more agonizing than I could have ever imagined. The tension in my living room was suffocating as I faced my 3 children for what I prayed would be a healing conversation about Arthur's will and our fractured family. Mark sat rigidly on the edge of the sofa, his jaw clenched with barely contained anger. Lisa perched nervously in Arthur's favorite armchair, her eyes darting between her brothers with mounting anxiety. But it was Jake who commanded the room with his aggressive posture and the cold triumph gleaming in his eyes. 3 weeks had passed since Arthur's funeral, 3 weeks since Jake had conspicuously absented himself from saying goodbye to the man who had loved him like a biological son for over 15 years. Now he lounged in my home with an air of ownership that made my skin crawl, his expensive suit and designer watch, flashing evidence of a lifestyle that clearly exceeded his supposed financial struggles. "Let's cut through the emotional manipulation, Mom." Jake began, his voice dripping with condescension. "We all know Dad's will was influenced by your poisonous whispers about me. A man doesn't just disinherit his eldest son without serious mental interference." The casual cruelty of his words took my breath away. This was the child I had nursed through countless illnesses, the young man whose artistic dreams I had supported even when others called them foolish. The son whose absence from Arthur's deathbed had broken my heart more than losing my husband. Jake. I said, my voice trembling, despite my efforts to remain composed. Your father made his decisions based on your 5-year estrangement, not on anything, I said. You chose to cut us out of your life. You refused every attempt at reconciliation. But Jake was already shaking his head, his expression shifting into the practiced performance I had learned to recognize and dread. His face contorted with manufactured pain as he launched into his prepared narrative. That's exactly what I'm talking about, he said, his voice rising with righteous indignation. You've rewritten history to make yourself the victim. Dad knew I was the most responsible son, the one who sacrificed the most for this family. You're losing your mind if you think his final wishes reflect anything other than your manipulation. This $4 million estate should be distributed based on merit and need, not on your emotional games. The audacity of his claims left me speechless. Jake detailed his massive personal debt from failed investments and what I suspected was a serious gambling problem, presenting his financial irresponsibility as evidence that he deserved the largest share of Arthur's carefully planned legacy. I'm drowning in $250,000 of debt because I took risks, because I believed in building something bigger than myself. He continued, his voice taking on the tone he had perfected for his social media following. While Mark and Lisa played it safe, I pursued ambitious ventures that would have made Dad proud. Now, I'm being punished for my courage, my vision. Mark exploded from his seat, his face flushed with fury. You're lying through your teeth, Jake. You haven't worked an honest day in 5 years. Your ambitious ventures are gambling debts and get-rich-quick schemes that blew up in your face. That's enough. Jake snapped his mask, slipping to reveal the cold calculation beneath. You have no idea what I've sacrificed for this family. Mom turned you against me years ago with her constant favoritism and her need to control every narrative. Lisa, tears streaming down her face, looked between her brothers with heartbreak written across her features. Please stop, she whispered. This is exactly what Jake said would happen. Everyone's turning against each other. People in town are already talking, already choosing sides based on what they're reading online. The mention of his social media campaign sent ice through my veins. Within hours of the will reading, Jake had begun posting carefully crafted messages, painting himself as a victim of maternal neglect and favoritism. His followers, many of whom had never met our family, were already spreading his version of events across multiple platforms. You want to know about humanity, Mom, Jake said, pulling out his phone and beginning to record. Let's talk about a mother who emotionally abandoned her eldest son, who created such a toxic environment that I had to cut contact to protect my mental health. Let's discuss a woman so controlling that she convinced my stepfather to disinherit me out of spite. I watched in horror as he live-streamed our private family meeting, his performance, calculated to generate maximum sympathy from his online audience. Comments began flooding in, immediately expressing outrage at my supposed cruelty and offering Jake their unwavering support. Within minutes of ending his live stream, Jake's lawyer, Mr. Davies, called to discuss the next steps in what he termed seeking justice for 18 years of alleged financial abuse and emotional neglect. The speed of their coordination revealed how thoroughly they had planned this assault on my character and Arthur's final wishes. My client, Jake Peterson, has endured decades of systematic psychological manipulation, Davies stated during our brief, chilling phone conversation. This appears to be a clear case of elder exploitation in reverse, where a controlling parent has influenced a vulnerable older adult against his own son's best interests. The legal framework they were constructing was as sophisticated as it was malicious. They weren't simply contesting the will. They were building a case that would destroy my reputation, question my mental competence, and reframe Arthur's carefully considered decisions as evidence of my manipulative influence. Jake's demands escalated with breathtaking speed. He threatened immediate legal action to contest the will while simultaneously launching an increasingly vicious social media campaign. His posts became more detailed and more damaging, accusing me of emotional abuse, deliberate neglect during his childhood, and systematic favoritism toward Mark and Lisa. My mother created a hierarchy in our home where love was conditional on compliance. He wrote in a post that garnered thousands of shares. She used emotional manipulation to turn my siblings against me and ultimately convinced my stepfather that I was unworthy of his love. Now she's trying to steal my inheritance while I face financial ruin. Each post was accompanied by carefully selected childhood photographs that he recontextualized to support his narrative. A picture of Mark receiving a school award became evidence of favoritism. A family vacation photo where Jake appeared unhappy was presented as proof of his exclusion and mistreatment. The response from our community was swift and devastating. Neighbors who had known our family for decades began viewing me with suspicion. Former colleagues distanced themselves from the controversy. Even some family friends started treating me with cautious sympathy, as if Jake's accusations might contain kernels of truth. But perhaps most painful was watching Lisa struggle with the impossible position Jake had created. She loved her brother despite his flaws, but she also knew the truth about our family dynamics. His systematic campaign was forcing her to choose between loyalty to me and her desire to maintain some connection with Jake. "Mom," she said privately after Jake had stormed out, promising to expose the truth about our family, "I don't know how to fight this. He's so convincing online and people want to believe his story. It's easier to blame you than to accept that sometimes children make choices that break their parents' hearts." As I sat alone that evening, reading the hundreds of comments supporting Jake's version of events, I realized I was facing something far more dangerous than a simple inheritance dispute. This was a calculated character assassination designed to destroy not just my relationship with Jake, but my standing in our community, my professional reputation, and possibly my sanity. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent my career managing crises and protecting reputations, but now I was watching my own life's work crumble under an attack from the person I had loved and protected most fiercely. Jake wasn't just seeking money. He was systematically dismantling the woman who had sacrificed everything to give him opportunities he had squandered through his own choices. The legal assault intensified with devastating efficiency. Mr. Davies wasted no time filing a formal lawsuit to contest Arthur's will, but his strategy extended far beyond simple probate court proceedings. He began strategically leaking carefully crafted narratives to online tabloids and local media outlets, painting me as a cold, controlling matriarch who had psychologically manipulated a vulnerable widower against his own son. Patricia Peterson represents a growing problem in blended families, Davies told a blogger who specialized in family drama content. Adult children often find themselves cut off from their inheritance by manipulative step-parents who exploit the natural confusion and emotional vulnerability that comes with aging. The implications were clear and calculated. Arthur hadn't been of sound mind when he finalized his will, and I had taken advantage of his diminished capacity to secure a larger inheritance for my biological children. Davies demanded access to my personal journals, financial records, and even medical documentation of Arthur's final months, implying that I had mismanaged his care and abused my position as his wife and healthcare proxy. Each legal filing became a public relations weapon designed to chip away at my credibility and mental competence. Davies painted me as a woman obsessed with control, someone who had systematically isolated Arthur from his stepson and influenced his testamentary decisions through psychological manipulation. But the true scope of Jake's vindictiveness became clear when I discovered he had been conducting a covert campaign among our extended family and longtime friends. Using his considerable charm and storytelling abilities, Jake had been reaching out to relatives I hadn't spoken with in months, feeding them carefully distorted versions of his childhood experiences. I learned about this betrayal when my sister Margaret called, her voice heavy with confusion and concern. "Patricia," she said carefully, "Jake reached out to me last week. He told me some troubling things about his childhood, about feeling excluded and unloved. He said you always favored Mark and Lisa, that you made him feel like an outsider in his own family." The conversation was agonizing because Margaret's questions revealed how skillfully Jake had twisted innocent memories into evidence of systematic mistreatment. He had reframed my efforts to help him with his homework as controlling micromanagement. My attempts to include him in family activities became forced obligations that made him uncomfortable. Even my support for his artistic pursuits was recast as conditional love dependent on his achievements. "I've always thought you were a wonderful mother," Margaret continued, "but Jake seems so sincere, so hurt. He's not asking for money or support, just understanding. It's hard to believe someone would lie about something so painful." That's when the devastating realization hit me with full force. Jake's campaign wasn't just about securing his inheritance or even destroying my reputation. This was about vindictive psychological warfare designed to rewrite our entire family history and isolate me from every source of emotional support. He was systematically contaminating every relationship I valued, turning my own memories into weapons against me. I began hearing echoes of his poison everywhere. Neighbors mentioned what they'd heard about my parenting style. Former colleagues expressed carefully neutral sympathy for my difficult family situation. Even my hairdresser, someone I'd known for 15 years, asked gentle questions about whether I was getting the support I needed during this challenging time. The isolation was becoming complete and terrifying, but it also forced me to confront a truth I had been avoiding. In a moment of raw honesty, I acknowledged to myself and later confided in my retired elder law attorney ally the most painful chapter of my relationship with Jake. Years ago, when Jake was 22 and struggling to establish himself as an artist, he had become involved in activities that went far beyond simple financial irresponsibility. Through a combination of gambling addiction and desperation, he had accumulated crushing debts totaling nearly $150,000. But worse than the money was what he had done to obtain it. Jake had been selling stolen artwork pieces he acquired through connections in the underground art scene. He claimed he was just helping to relocate pieces to collectors who would appreciate them. But the reality was far more serious. When investigators began closing in, Jake faced potential federal charges for trafficking stolen cultural artifacts, crimes that would have resulted in years in federal prison and the complete destruction of his future. Arthur, whose reputation as a prominent businessman was already under scrutiny due to Jake's activities, was devastated. The scandal would have destroyed not only Jake, but potentially Arthur's carefully built commercial empire and our entire family's standing in the community. As a public relations manager with extensive experience in crisis communication and damage control, I understood exactly what needed to be done. I liquidated my entire personal savings account, over $100,000 I had accumulated over decades of careful planning for retirement security. But money alone wasn't enough to solve this crisis. I meticulously fabricated financial records to create a paper trail showing Jake's debt as legitimate business loans rather than gambling losses. I used my professional network and reputation to discreetly contact the right people, arranging for evidence to disappear and charges to be quietly dropped. I called in every favor I had accumulated over 20 years in public relations, sacrificing professional relationships and burning bridges to save my son from the consequences of his choices. Most painfully, I convinced Arthur to quietly pay an additional $50,000 to ensure certain witnesses remained silent and that Jake's record was completely expunged. Arthur, who prided himself on ethical business practices, compromised his own principles because of his love for me and his desire to protect our family. I kept this sacrifice completely hidden from Jake, never wanting him to feel beholden to me or to carry the guilt of knowing how much his freedom had cost. I allowed him to believe he had somehow escaped the consequences of his actions through luck or clever legal maneuvering. I thought my silence was a gift, a way to preserve his dignity and give him a fresh start. Now watching Jake publicly accuse me of emotional abuse and financial manipulation, the irony was unbearable. The son whose life and freedom I had purchased with my entire financial future was now claiming I had never shown him love or support. The young man whose criminal record I had erased was questioning my integrity and moral character on social media for thousands of strangers to judge. But Jake's cruelty reached new depths when he began targeting Arthur's memory directly. In a particularly vicious live stream, Jake tearfully declared that I had been slowly poisoning Arthur against him for years, filling his ears with lies and manipulating his emotions during his most vulnerable moments. My stepfather was a good man who loved me. Jake sobbed for his online audience, but Patricia systematically turned him against me. She made him believe I was irresponsible and ungrateful. She used his love for her to steal my rightful place in his heart and ultimately in his will. The accusations weren't just false. They were a perverse inversion of reality. Arthur had been heartbroken by Jake's estrangement, spending countless evenings wondering what he had done wrong and how he could repair their relationship. I had been the one encouraging Arthur to keep reaching out to leave the door open for reconciliation, to continue including Jake in his will, despite years of rejection and silence. Mark, watching his brother's performance online, called me in a rage. "He's insane, Mom. He's literally accusing you of the exact opposite of what actually happened. Dad spent years trying to connect with Jake, and you were always the one telling him to be patient, to keep trying." Lisa was even more upset. "People are believing him, Mom. The comments on his videos are getting worse. They're calling you a monster, a manipulative witch who destroyed a loving family. Some of them are saying horrible things about what should happen to you." Davy, sensing an opportunity to escalate the pressure, formally proposed a settlement meeting designed to force my capitulation. His solution was as calculating as it was insulting. I would publicly retract any accusations against Jake's character, acknowledge the suffering my parenting had caused him, and immediately pay him $250,000 from Arthur's estate as an advancement against his claimed inheritance. In return, Jake would graciously agree to drop his lawsuit and cease his public defamation campaign. The proposal was designed to buy my silence and dignity while positioning Jake as the magnanimous son, willing to forgive his abusive mother's decades of mistreatment. This is a generous offer considering the documented harm your parenting caused. My client, Davies explained during our phone conversation. Jake is willing to put aside years of trauma and abuse in the interest of family healing, but this requires acknowledgement of your role in creating this situation. As I sat in my empty house that night, Arthur's absence, a constant ache in my chest, I felt the weight of a terrible clarity settling over me. Jake hadn't simply become estranged or resentful. He had transformed into someone capable of systematic psychological warfare against the woman who had sacrificed everything to protect him. The son I had saved from prison was now using every tool at his disposal to destroy me completely. But buried beneath my pain and shock, something else was stirring. The same strategic mind that had navigated countless public relations crises was beginning to analyze Jake's campaign with professional detachment. And what I saw gave me the first flicker of hope I had felt in weeks. Jake was overplaying his hand, creating inconsistencies in his narrative that could be exposed, and most importantly, he had no idea that I possessed documented evidence of every claim he was making. The legal machinery that Jake and Davies had set in motion reached its devastating climax with surgical precision. I awoke to find a sheriff's deputy at my door, serving me with papers that would forever change my understanding of how completely my son had transformed into my enemy. The temporary restraining order was a masterpiece of legal manipulation built on a foundation of carefully crafted lies and twisted interpretations of my attempts to defend myself. Davies had convinced a judge that my efforts to contact family members and correct Jake's false narratives constituted obsessive behavior and emotional harassment related to the inheritance dispute. Patricia Peterson is hereby prohibited from contacting, approaching, or communicating with Jake Peterson through any means including, but not limited to direct contact social media, third parties, or intermediaries. The order read in cold legal language. Violation of this order will result in immediate arrest and criminal prosecution. The restraining order effectively made me a criminal for trying to maintain any relationship with my eldest son. But more insidiously, it extended to his social circle and community figures, which Davies had broadly defined to include virtually anyone Jake had influenced with his online campaign. I was now legally forbidden from defending myself to neighbors, family, friends, or even distant relatives who might believe his lies. The isolation was swift and complete. I couldn't attend community events where Jake might be present. I couldn't respond to social media posts where he tagged mutual acquaintances. I couldn't even send cards or gifts to family members if there was any possibility Jake might see them as attempts at indirect communication. But Jake wasn't satisfied with legal banishment. He wanted complete emotional annihilation, and he achieved it with a cruelty that took my breath away. In my desperation to reach whatever remained of the son I had raised and loved, I spent days carefully assembling a small album of our most precious memories together. I included photographs from his childhood Jake's first art show at age 12, where his paintings had filled me with such pride. Family vacations where his laughter had been the soundtrack to some of my happiest moments. His high school graduation, where Arthur and I had beamed with parental joy as he walked across the stage. I wrote a letter that poured out 24 years of unconditional maternal love, emphasizing every moment of joy and connection we had shared. I reminisced about the bedtime stories I had told him, the countless art supplies I had bought to nurture his creativity, the times I had held him through nightmares and celebrated his achievements. I carefully avoided any mention of his current behavior or our legal battle, focusing entirely on the positive memories that I hoped might rekindle some spark of the loving relationship we had once shared. my dearest Jake, I wrote, I know you're angry and hurt right now, but please remember that a mother's love doesn't end because of conflict or misunderstanding. These pictures represent the joy you brought into my life from the moment you were born. You were my first baby, my first experience of that overwhelming love that changes everything about who you are. I will always be grateful for the privilege of being your mother, no matter what anyone says or believes. I left the album on his doorstep late one evening, hoping that seeing our shared history might crack the wall of hatred he had built around his heart. For 3 days, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, he would remember who we had been before his pain and resentment had poisoned everything. Instead, I discovered the album's fate through his social media feed in a post that shattered whatever remained of my faith in his capacity for human decency. The photograph showed my carefully assembled memories scattered across what appeared to be a garbage bag, the pictures torn and defaced, some burned around the edges. Cleaning out the clutter, his caption read with casual cruelty, "Some people just can't let go of the past, moving forward from negativity and desperate attempts to manipulate. Time to focus on healthy relationships and positive energy." The comments below his post were filled with supportive messages from followers who praised his strength in cutting ties with toxic family members and his courage in moving beyond his abusive childhood. Hundreds of strangers celebrated the destruction of my most treasured memories as if they were witnessing a moment of personal triumph. That image, our irreplaceable family photographs reduced to garbage, our shared history literally torn apart and thrown away, broke something inside me that I'm not sure ever fully healed. These weren't just pictures. They were the visual record of a relationship I had cherished for over 2 decades, moments of pure love and connection that could never be recreated or replaced. The realization that Jake had deliberately participated in this act of emotional vandalism, had probably planned and staged it for maximum social media impact, confirmed that my son was truly gone. Whatever had replaced him was capable of calculated cruelty that went far beyond simple resentment or financial desperation. His final communication was a text message that arrived at 3 a.m, as if he had been lying awake, planning the perfect words to inflict maximum damage. "Consider this closed, Mom. You lose. Don't contact us again. Ever. You're causing too much trouble with your accusations and your pathetic attempts at manipulation. I'm done pretending you were ever a real mother to me." The next day, Davies called local news outlets with a carefully prepared statement about my increasingly erratic behavior and obsessive fixation on controlling Jake's financial future. He positioned my album of family photographs as evidence of my inability to accept boundaries and suggested that my mental instability made me potentially dangerous to both Jake and the community. My client is deeply concerned about his mother's deteriorating psychological condition. Davies told a local blogger who specialized in family drama. Her recent behavior suggests someone who has lost touch with reality and may pose a risk to herself and others. The family is hoping she will seek appropriate mental health treatment. Sitting alone in my house that night, legally prohibited from defending myself, and watching my reputation crumble in real time online, I felt the weight of complete defeat. Jake had successfully transformed me from a respected member of our community into a cautionary tale about aging parents who couldn't accept their children's independence. But in that moment of absolute despair, I was forced to confront the most painful secret of my life, a truth I had shared with no one and had hoped to take to my grave. The weight of this secret, combined with everything Jake was putting me through, finally broke my resolve to protect everyone else at the expense of my own well-being. In a moment of raw desperation, I called my retired elder law attorney ally and revealed something that would change everything if it ever became public. Arthur's death hadn't happened the way the world believed. My beloved husband hadn't died from a sudden peaceful heart attack, as his death certificate stated. For the final 8 months of his life, Arthur had been battling early onset dementia, a diagnosis that would have destroyed his business reputation and potentially invalidated years of contracts and financial decisions if it had become public knowledge. Arthur's company was publicly traded with thousands of employees and investors, depending on his leadership and decision-making capacity. A dementia diagnosis would have triggered immediate questions about his competency, potentially leading to lawsuit stock crashes and the destruction of everything he had built over 40 years of brilliant business leadership. So, I had made an impossible choice. Working with a compromised doctor who owed Arthur significant favors, I had meticulously covered up his true condition. I managed his medical care, privately hired discreet specialists who made house calls and carefully choreographed his public appearances to hide his increasing confusion and agitation. During his worst episodes, when the dementia made him angry and paranoid, I absorbed his accusations and rage while maintaining the fiction that he was simply dealing with normal stress. I managed his business communications, gradually transferring responsibilities to trusted executives while making it appear that Arthur was simply delegating more as part of a planned transition. When he died, I ensured that the death certificate listed cardiac arrest rather than complications from dementia. I fabricated a narrative about his peaceful passing, suppressing any mention of his cognitive decline to preserve both his dignity and the financial security of everyone who depended on his company. This immense sacrifice, managing his care, protecting his reputation, absorbing his confused rage, and bearing the emotional burden alone, had nearly destroyed my own mental health. I had given up my social life, my professional activities, and my emotional well-being to ensure that Arthur's legacy remained untarnished and that his business empire didn't collapse under the weight of questions about his mental competency. Now Jake was using my knowledge of mental health resources and my careful management of Arthur's final months as evidence that I was the one suffering from cognitive decline and paranoid delusions. The very sacrifice I had made to protect Arthur's memory was being weaponized against me by the son whose freedom and future I had purchased with my life savings years earlier. The cosmic irony was unbearable. Everything I had done out of love, saving Jake from prison, protecting Arthur's reputation, maintaining family stability at enormous personal cost, was being twisted into evidence of my moral failings and mental instability. My greatest acts of selfless devotion had become the ammunition Jake used to destroy me. As I sat in my empty house, legally isolated and publicly shamed, I realized that Jake's campaign wasn't just about money or even revenge. This was about complete erasure, the systematic destruction of everything I had been and everything I had accomplished. He wanted to rewrite our family history so thoroughly that no trace remained of the woman who had loved him unconditionally and sacrificed everything to protect him. But buried beneath my overwhelming pain, something else was stirring the cold, analytical mind that had navigated decades of public relations crises and protected clients from their own worst impulses. For the first time since this nightmare began, I started thinking like the professional crisis manager I had been rather than the heartbroken mother I had become. Jake had made a critical error in his campaign of destruction. In his eagerness to completely annihilate me, he had created a documented trail of lies, contradictions, and malicious behavior that could be analyzed, exposed, and used against him. Most importantly, he had no idea that I possessed years of recorded evidence that would reveal the truth about his character and motivations. The final battle for Arthur's legacy and my own dignity was about to begin. The restraining order created a psychological prison more suffocating than any physical confinement I could have imagined. In the weeks that followed, I found myself trapped in a terrifying abyss of isolation, haunted by the monumental secret of Arthur's true condition and the years of sacrifice I had made to protect his legacy. Every morning brought the crushing realization that the life I had so carefully constructed, the reputation I had meticulously built, was founded on a protective lie I had maintained out of love. The irony was devastating beyond words. As a public relations manager, I had built my career on crafting truthful narratives and managing complex communications crises. Now that same commitment to protecting others through strategic silence had become the weapon Jake was using to destroy me. The revelation that our entire family's respected legacy was built on my careful concealment of Arthur's dementia now served as the foundation of my undoing, turning every loving choice I had made into evidence of my supposed deception and mental instability. I sat alone in my house, surrounded by decades of memories that now felt contaminated by Jake's poison. The silence was deafening, broken only by the constant mental replay of his cruel accusations and the echo of torn photographs hitting garbage bags. I began to question my own reality, wondering if perhaps I had lost touch with truth somewhere along the way. But Jake and Davies weren't content with my private torment. They escalated their public campaign with the precision of professionals who understood exactly how to destroy a reputation. Davies began discreetly contacting public relations associations and crisis communications firms, spreading carefully crafted concerns about my mental state and professional competence. "I'm calling as a courtesy to the profession," Davies told the president of the National Public Relations Association during a conversation I later learned about through sympathetic colleagues. "Patricia Peterson, one of your long-standing members, appears to be experiencing significant cognitive decline. Her recent behavior suggests she may be developing paranoid fantasies about reputation management and crisis communications. Given her access to sensitive client information over the years, we felt obligated to raise these concerns. The campaign was devastatingly effective. My reputation for sharp judgment and unshakable integrity, built over 30 years of flawless crisis management, was systematically dismantled through whispered doubts and professional concern. Speaking engagements were quietly canceled. Professional organizations removed my name from advisory boards. Local civic events where I had served on committees for decades suddenly found reasons to replace me. Former colleagues stopped returning my calls, and when we encountered each other in public, I could see the uncertainty in their eyes. The woman they had respected as a master of communication strategy was now viewed as someone who might be losing her grip on reality. "Patricia," one former client said carefully when she called to check on me, "people are saying you've been under a lot of stress. Are you getting the support you need? Maybe it would be good to take a step back from public activities for a while." The financial devastation followed with cruel efficiency. The escalating legal fees from defending myself against Jake's inheritance lawsuit and defamation campaign completely drained my resources. My savings, already depleted from protecting Jake years earlier, evaporated under the assault of legal bills that seemed to multiply daily. Davies had somehow convinced a judge to freeze my bank accounts pending investigation of financial irregularities in my management of Arthur's affairs. Without access to my own money, without any income due to the destruction of my professional reputation, I watched helplessly as my carefully built financial security crumbled. The final blow came when I was forcibly evicted from the home Arthur and I had shared for 15 years. The house where we had planned to grow old together, where I had nursed him through his final illness while protecting his dignity, was sold at public auction to cover my mounting debts. Strangers walked through our garden, commenting on the outdated furnishings and the excessive number of family photographs. My remaining possessions were scattered across the lawn like the remnants of a life that no longer mattered. Professional awards, family heirlooms, the china set Arthur had given me for our 10th anniversary, all reduced to lot numbers in an estate sale. I was literally rendered homeless, stripped of everything that had defined my identity and self-worth. The homeless shelter was a crowded, impersonal facility where I became just another broken soul among dozens of others. I lay on a thin mattress, listening to the sounds of other people's despair, wondering how my life had come to this point. But the cruelest blow was yet to come. Mark and Lisa, my remaining children, who I had hoped might see through Jake's manipulation, orchestrated a public relations event that shattered what remained of my heart. They leveraged my grandchildren, Ethan and Chloe, in a charity event for something called the Family Truth Foundation, an organization supposedly dedicated to healing from family secrets. I learned about it from a former client who sent me a link with trembling hands, warning me that I might not want to watch. But I couldn't resist the need to see my grandchildren, even if it meant witnessing my own destruction. There was 15-year-old Ethan standing at a podium in a crisp suit, delivering a speech that had clearly been written by adults and rehearsed for maximum impact. Family secrets can be toxic, he said, his young voice steady and confident. Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones hiding the most dangerous truths. It's important to support family members who have the courage to expose these hidden problems. 13-year-old Chloe followed with an art presentation displaying a drawing of an honest family that conspicuously excluded any figure that could represent me. This is my picture of what families look like when everyone tells the truth, she explained to the audience. When there are no more secrets or lies to hurt people. The message was unmistakable. I was the source of family dysfunction, the keeper of dangerous secrets, the person from whom they needed protection. My own grandchildren, whom I had dreamed of spoiling with love and wisdom, had been weaponized against me in the most public way possible. This programmed display of emotional distance by my beloved grandchildren felt like a physical wound that would never heal. These children, who had once run to me with scraped knees and homework questions, now saw me as someone to be avoided, feared, and publicly rejected. As I sat in the shelter that night, surrounded by the sounds of other broken lives, I felt myself sinking into a despair so profound that I began to understand why some people simply stopped fighting. The weight of Jake's lies, the isolation from my family, the destruction of my reputation, and the complete loss of my financial security felt unbearable. But then, like a miracle emerging from the darkest moment, my phone rang with a call that would change everything. The voice belonged to Eleanor Hartwell, an elderly woman I had helped navigate a devastating corporate scandal 25 years ago. She was now 83 years old, but her voice was strong and filled with certainty. "Patricia," she said, I've been following what's happening to you, and I want you to know that I remember exactly who you are. You saved my husband's company and our family's reputation when everyone else said it was hopeless. You showed integrity, wisdom, and courage when others were ready to run. I don't know what's going on with your son, but I know it's not the truth. Eleanor offered immediate financial support to help me mount a proper legal defense, and more importantly, she connected me with a network of retired legal professionals who specialized in elder fraud, defamation, and family manipulation cases. For the first time in months, I heard voices of people who believed in my character and were willing to fight for justice. We've seen cases like this before, one of the attorneys told me during our first consultation. Adult children who use sophisticated manipulation and legal tactics to destroy elderly parents for financial gain. What makes your case unusual is the level of professional sophistication involved, but that also means there will be documented evidence we can use. As I hung up the phone that night, something fierce and determined stirred within me for the first time since this nightmare began. Jake thought he had broken me completely, erased me from existence, silenced my voice forever. But he had forgotten something crucial about crisis communications professionals. We don't just manage disasters. We investigate them, document them, and ensure that truth eventually prevails. The war for my dignity and Arthur's memory was far from over. Eleanor's support had given me hope, but Jake wasn't finished with his campaign of destruction. If anything, my small network of allies seemed to motivate him to escalate his efforts to an unprecedented level. What he orchestrated next was so calculating, so professionally devastating, that it demonstrated just how completely he had transformed into someone capable of systematic psychological warfare. Jake leveraged Davies's legal standing and his growing influence as a social media truth teller to organize what he called a Truth and Transparency in Family Legacies Summit. The event was positioned as a prestigious national conference, bringing together legal experts, family therapists, and social media influencers to discuss the dangers of hidden family manipulation and the importance of exposing toxic family secrets. The irony was breathtaking. My son, whose entire life had been built on lies, he had told about his character and whose freedom I had purchased by covering up his criminal activities, was now positioning himself as a champion of truth and transparency. Jake was announced as the keynote speaker, presenting what he called a groundbreaking case study on inherited family dysfunction and the multi-generational impact of manipulative parenting. Though he never mentioned our family by name, every detail was clearly based on our situation, but twisted and distorted beyond recognition. Today, I want to share the story of a family trapped by decades of hidden manipulation. Jake announced to an audience of hundreds, with thousands more watching the live stream. A story of how one person's need for control can destroy multiple generations, and how the courage to speak truth can finally break these destructive cycles. I learned about the summit from Eleanor, who had been monitoring Jake's activities and was horrified by what she discovered. "Patricia," she said, her voice shaking with anger, "he's using your own professional methods against you. Everything you taught clients about narrative control and reputation management, he's turning into weapons for his attack." From my small room in a transitional housing facility Eleanor had helped me secure, I watched the summit's live stream on a borrowed laptop, witnessing the systematic dismantling of everything I had worked for throughout my professional life. Jake stood confidently at the podium, presenting himself as a brave truth teller who had exposed decades of hidden family manipulation despite enormous personal cost. Traditional crisis communications, Jake said with practiced authority, often serves to protect the guilty rather than help the innocent. We see this particularly in family systems, where one member uses professional manipulation skills to control narratives and suppress inconvenient truths. Every word was calculated to portray my life's work as morally bankrupt, my professional expertise as evidence of my manipulative nature. He spoke about the danger of reputation, managers who become so skilled at hiding truth that they lose touch with reality, and the responsibility of younger generations to break free from inherited dysfunction. Davies appeared alongside Jake, providing legal credibility to the character assassination. What we're seeing more frequently, Davies told the interviewer, are cases where professional communicators use their skills to create elaborate family mythologies that serve their own interests while harming those who depend on them. It's a form of intellectual abuse that can be particularly damaging because it's so sophisticated. But the most devastating moment came when Jake introduced video testimonials from family members. Ethan, now 17, appeared in a pre-recorded segment that had clearly been professionally produced and carefully scripted. I used to think my grandmother was just really good at her job, Ethan said, looking directly into the camera with the confidence of someone who had been extensively coached. But now, I understand that her skills were being used to hide the truth about our family. She taught us that managing perception was more important than being honest, and that damaged all of us. My 17-year-old grandson, whom I had once helped with school projects about honesty and integrity, was now publicly declaring that I had corrupted his moral development through professional manipulation. The betrayal was so complete, so carefully orchestrated, that I felt something break inside me that might never heal. Chloe's appearance was even more heartbreaking. Now 15, and clearly influenced by years of Jake's narrative, she giggled as she held up one of my old public relations textbooks. Grandma used to make us read these boring old books about managing messages, she said with teenage disdain. We prefer unfiltered truth. All that fancy communication stuff just makes everything more complicated. The audience laughed appreciatively at her youthful wisdom, never knowing they were witnessing a child who had been systematically turned against her grandmother's life's work. Everything I had tried to teach my grandchildren about the importance of thoughtful communication and ethical narrative management was being reframed as evidence of my moral corruption. As the summit continued, I sat trembling in the small chair, watching decades of professional accomplishment being twisted into a cautionary tale about the dangers of communication manipulation. Jake fielded questions from the audience with the confidence of someone who had completely convinced himself of his own victimhood. How do you deal with family members who refuse to acknowledge their manipulative behavior? Someone asked. It's heartbreaking, Jake replied, his voice filled with practiced pain. Sometimes you have to accept that people who have spent decades controlling narratives can't stop even when that control is destroying the people they claim to love. The most loving thing you can do is set boundaries and speak your truth, even when they try to make you feel guilty for it. The comment section of the live stream was filled with supportive messages praising Jake's courage and expressing outrage at my supposed manipulation of family dynamics. Thousands of strangers were celebrating the destruction of my professional legacy as if they were witnessing a moment of justice being served. But something else was happening that Jake couldn't see or control. Eleanor had quietly reached out to several of my former colleagues and clients, people who had worked with me for decades and understood my actual character and professional methods. Dr. Margaret Chen, a respected crisis communications professor who had known me for 20 years, was watching the summit with growing disgust. After Jake's presentation ended, she immediately contacted Eleanor with an offer to provide a professional affidavit vouching for my ethical judgment and mental competence. What I'm seeing is a sophisticated character assassination designed to exploit public misunderstanding of crisis communications principles, Dr. Chen told Eleanor. Everything Jake is describing is the opposite of Patricia's actual approach to client work. She was known for her commitment to truth-telling, even when it was difficult for clients to hear. Other professionals were reaching similar conclusions. The very sophistication of Jake's attack was beginning to work against him, revealing patterns that experienced communication experts recognized as manipulation rather than legitimate whistleblowing. As I closed the laptop that evening, unable to watch any more of my life's work being perverted into evidence of my supposed moral failings, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this nightmare began: a cold, analytical clarity about what Jake was really doing. He wasn't just attacking my reputation or seeking financial gain. This was a systematic attempt to rewrite the narrative of our entire family history, positioning himself as the heroic truth-teller who had exposed decades of hidden manipulation. He was using my own professional expertise as evidence against me, twisting everything I had taught him about communication strategy into weapons for my destruction. But Jake had made a critical error in his eagerness to completely annihilate my professional legacy. In creating such an elaborate and public attack, he had also created a documented trail of his own manipulation tactics that could be analyzed and exposed by people who understood exactly what he was doing. For the first time since Arthur's death, I began to think like the crisis communications professional I had been, rather than the heartbroken mother I had become. And what I saw gave me the first real hope I had felt in months. Jake was overplaying his hand, and people who truly understood professional ethics were beginning to notice. Jake's success at the Truth and Transparency Summit seemed to embolden him for what could only be described as total war. The public attention and validation he had received from his performance as a wronged son and truth-telling hero had fed something dark and insatiable within him. He wasn't content with destroying my reputation or isolating me from my family. He wanted complete financial annihilation, the total erasure of every trace of the life I had built. The final assault came in the form of a lawsuit so comprehensive and malicious that it took my breath away. Jake filed a $2 million claim against me, alleging intentional infliction of emotional distress and systematic defamation resulting from what he characterized as my decades-long campaign of psychological manipulation and abuse. The lawsuit was frivolous, but legally sophisticated, designed to force me into massive legal fees that would completely drain whatever resources Eleanor's support had temporarily provided. Davies had crafted the complaint with surgical precision, weaving together Jake's false narratives about his childhood with careful legal language that made my past sacrifices for him sound like evidence of controlling and abusive behavior. But the financial attack extended far beyond the lawsuit itself. Jake had systematically contacted my former public relations firm, my retirement fund administrators, and even professional liability insurance companies, filing detailed complaints that painted me as mentally incompetent and professionally dangerous. We have serious concerns about Patricia Peterson's cognitive state and her fitness to manage financial affairs, Jake wrote in letters that were somehow leaked to industry publications. Her recent behavior suggests possible dementia or other cognitive impairments that may have affected her professional judgment for years. We believe there may be undisclosed client issues that warrant investigation. The bureaucratic machinery moved with terrifying efficiency. Within weeks, I received official notification that my public relations pension was being suspended, pending a competency evaluation and investigation into potential professional misconduct. My professional certifications were revoked based on Jake's allegations of gross ethical violations and client manipulation. 30 years of flawless professional service, countless clients whose reputations I had protected and restored, decades of ethical practice and industry leadership, all erased with a few administrative signatures based on the lies of a son whose criminal record I had expunged to protect his future. Without my pension facing legal fees that multiplied daily with my professional reputation destroyed and my ability to earn income eliminated, I faced complete financial ruin. The transitional housing facility Eleanor had helped me secure was no longer affordable, and I found myself facing homelessness once again. The eviction from my final refuge was orchestrated with deliberate cruelty. Jake had somehow arranged for local media to be present when I was forced to leave, ensuring that my public humiliation was documented and broadcast. The image of a former public relations executive carrying her few remaining possessions in garbage bags appeared in local newspapers under headlines like PR Professional Can't Manage Own Crisis and Truth Teller's Mother Faces Consequences. I sought shelter in a crowded overnight facility where I was surrounded by the sounds of other broken lives. The contrast between my current circumstances and the respect I had once commanded was so stark that it felt surreal, like watching someone else's nightmare unfold. Mark and Lisa's response to my complete destitution was perhaps more painful than Jake's active cruelty. They maintained a chilling indifference to my homelessness, their silence more devastating than any direct attack could have been. When approached by a journalist who asked about their mother's situation, Mark publicly stated that he had no legal or moral obligation to support someone who refuses to take responsibility for the consequences of their actions. My mother made choices that led to this situation, he said, his voice cold and emotionless. She chose to enable my brother's lies and manipulation rather than seek help for her obvious mental health issues. We can't sacrifice our own family's well-being to enable her continued denial. Lisa's response was equally heartless. She posted regularly on social media about her busy family life and professional activities, carefully crafting an image of someone too absorbed in positive pursuits to be dragged down by family drama. When people asked about my situation, she would respond with carefully neutral statements about hoping everyone gets the help they need. But perhaps the most twisted demonstration of their complete victory came when Davies used funds from my stolen assets to purchase what he called a Truth and Transparency Center for Jake's growing influence operation. The facility, complete with professional recording studios and conference rooms, was built using money from my home's forced sale and my liquidated retirement accounts. The grand opening was a highly publicized event that Jake promoted as a symbol of triumph over family manipulation. Davies spoke at the dedication ceremony praising Jake's moral courage and commitment to exposing hidden truth while standing in a building that had been purchased with the proceeds of my life's work. Photographs of the gleaming facility, complete with marble floors and state-of-the-art technology, were shared widely across Jake's social media platforms. He stood proudly at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, surrounded by supporters and followers who praised his success, never knowing they were celebrating a monument built on the systematic destruction of his mother's life. The physical and emotional toll of this relentless siege finally overwhelmed my body's ability to cope. One morning in the shelter, as I struggled to get dressed with hands that had begun to shake from constant stress, a crushing pain seized my chest. The room spun around me, and I collapsed onto the concrete floor, my body finally surrendering to the immense pressure I had been carrying. The heart attack was severe and nearly fatal. I was rushed to the emergency room unconscious, my life hanging by a thread, while Jake's social media followers celebrated his latest truth-telling victory. For hours, I drifted between consciousness and darkness, isolated and abandoned by everyone except Eleanor and the small network of professionals who had begun to see through Jake's elaborate deception. But even in my unconscious state, my mind was working through the puzzle that Jake's behavior represented. As I lay barely clinging to life, I experienced a vivid, dreamlike memory that felt more real than my present circumstances. I was back in my office 25 years ago, working on a crisis communications case that had troubled me for months. The situation involved a wealthy family where the adult children were systematically manipulating their aging father's perception of reality to gain control of his estate. They used sophisticated psychological tactics, professional accomplices, and carefully crafted public narratives to isolate him from anyone who might question their version of events. In my dream, the fragmented pieces of that old case suddenly coalesced into a complete chilling realization. Jake's methods, his calculated use of social media, his alliance with legal and media professionals, his systematic isolation of me from sources of support were identical to the patterns I had professionally exposed decades ago. He wasn't acting out of hurt or financial desperation. This was sophisticated psychological warfare being executed by someone who understood exactly how to manipulate systems, people, and narratives to achieve maximum destruction while maintaining public sympathy. The recognition hit me like lightning, even in my unconscious state. I had spent my career protecting people from exactly this kind of predator, and now I was the target of the most sophisticated manipulation campaign I had ever encountered. Jake had studied my professional methods not to learn from them, but to weaponize them against me. As I lay there barely alive, that realization ignited something deep within me. The same analytical mind that had solved countless communication crises was finally seeing the complete picture of what Jake was doing. My body might be failing, but my understanding of his methods was becoming crystal clear. I had spent decades exposing fraud manipulation and character assassination. Now, even if it killed me, I was going to use everything I had learned to expose the most sophisticated deception of my career, the one being perpetrated by my own son. Recovery from the heart attack was slow and painful, but it gave me something I hadn't possessed in months: clarity about Jake's true nature and the sophisticated campaign he was waging against me. Eleanor had ensured I received the best possible medical care, and the network of professionals she had assembled was quietly building a case that would expose Jake's systematic fraud. From my hospital bed surrounded by machines monitoring my fragile vital signs, I made a decision that would either restore my dignity or complete my destruction. With the help of Maria, a compassionate nurse who had become invested in my story, I recorded a raw, emotional video message that laid out the truth about Jake's character and the manipulation tactics he had used against our family. My voice was still weak from the heart attack, occasionally trembling with exhaustion, but my words carried the weight of absolute truth and professional authority. I had spent 30 years crafting messages for maximum impact, and this would be the most important communication of my career. Mark Lisa. I began looking directly into the camera despite my physical frailty. I know you believe Jake's version of our family history, but I need you to hear something that he has never wanted you to understand. I played carefully selected excerpts from the security camera recordings that had captured Jake's explosive confrontations with Arthur and me over the years. His voice, clear and unmistakable, revealed the cold calculation behind his accusations of favoritism and his systematic attempts to manipulate Arthur's feelings about the will. "You hear that?" I said, pausing the recording. "That's not the voice of a wounded son seeking justice. That's someone strategically working to isolate Arthur from his family and control his final decisions. This is your brother calculating how to maximize his inheritance while destroying anyone who might question his methods." I provided carefully measured details about Arthur's true condition in his final months, explaining how Jake had exploited Arthur's confusion and vulnerability to plant seeds of doubt about my character and motivations. I revealed enough about my sacrifice to save Jake from prison years earlier, to remind my other children of the depth of my love and commitment to our family without compromising ongoing legal strategies. I liquidated my entire retirement savings to save Jake from federal prison when he was 22. I said, my voice strengthening with conviction. I used my professional reputation and network to erase his criminal record and give him a clean start in life. I never asked for gratitude or repayment, but now he's using that same freedom I purchased to destroy everything I hold dear. The video ended with a direct appeal to whatever remained of their filial love and family loyalty. "Please," I said, tears streaming down my face, but my voice steady, "don't let him rewrite our entire family history. Don't let Arthur's memory be contaminated by Jake's lies. Choose truth over comfort. Choose family over financial gain. Choose love over manipulation." Maria helped me send the video to Mark's personal email account, bypassing Jake's social media channels and public personas to reach him directly. We waited anxiously for a response, hoping that finally seeing undeniable evidence might break through the wall of manipulation Jake had built around my remaining children. But our hope was catastrophically misplaced. Jake, who had somehow gained access to Mark's email accounts through sophisticated monitoring software, intercepted my message before Mark could see it. What he did next demonstrated a level of calculated cruelty and technical sophistication that took my breath away. Jake took my raw emotional video and my carefully preserved audio evidence and systematically manipulated them using professional-grade digital editing software. He altered the tone and pacing of my voice to make me sound paranoid and unstable. He spliced segments out of context, added ominous background music, and cut sentences to completely change their meaning. The result was a grotesque distortion of my message that made me appear delusional, vindictive, and potentially dangerous. My desperate pleas for truth were reframed as grandiose paranoid fantasies and manipulative attempts to blackmail family members. The audio evidence of Jake's manipulation was either removed entirely or distorted beyond recognition. Jake then sold this heavily doctored video to a prominent national gossip news channel, presenting it as exclusive evidence of my complete mental breakdown and the dangerous delusions of an elderly woman who had lost touch with reality. This tragic video, Jake told the news anchor with perfectly practiced concern, shows just how far my mother's mental illness has progressed. She's now creating elaborate conspiracy theories and trying to blackmail family members with fabricated evidence. It's heartbreaking to watch someone you love deteriorate this way. The story went viral within hours. News anchors across multiple networks discussed my tragic decline and the impossible position my children faced in dealing with a mother who had clearly lost her grip on reality. The manipulated video was played repeatedly each viewing, further cementing the narrative of my mental instability and Jake's patient victimhood. But Jake wasn't satisfied with simply discrediting my message. He convinced Mark and Lisa to appear on national television for what he called a healing interview about the challenges of dealing with elderly family members who refuse help for mental health issues. I watched in complete horror as my remaining children, tears streaming down their faces, expressed profound sadness over my deteriorating condition and asked the public to respect their family's privacy during this incredibly difficult time. Our mother was once a brilliant, successful woman, Mark said, his voice breaking with what appeared to be genuine emotion. But something has changed dramatically in recent years. She's become obsessed with conspiracy theories and convinced that everyone is plotting against her. It's devastating to watch someone you love lose touch with reality this way. Lisa brought Ethan and Chloe onto the camera with her, my grandchildren looking appropriately sad and concerned as they delivered what were clearly rehearsed lines about wishing Grandma could get the help she needs and hoping she can find peace. The interview was a masterpiece of manipulation, portraying Jake as the strong older brother trying to protect his younger siblings from their mother's increasing instability, and Mark and Lisa as devoted children torn between love and necessary self-protection. Davies appeared alongside them, offering professional credibility to their narrative and reinforcing the legal necessity of the restraining orders and protective measures they had taken. Sometimes, he said with practiced sympathy, loving someone means protecting both them and yourself from the harm that untreated mental illness can cause. The national interview succeeded in cementing my public image as a delusional, potentially dangerous woman whose own family had been forced to take legal action for their own protection. Any attempt I might make to defend myself would now be dismissed as further evidence of my deteriorating mental state. But something was happening that Jake couldn't control or manipulate. Eleanor's network of professionals had been quietly analyzing Jake's digital manipulation techniques and building a comprehensive case that exposed his sophisticated fraud operation. Dr. James Harrison, a renowned cyber forensics expert who specialized in digital manipulation cases, had been meticulously analyzing the doctored video Jake had released. His preliminary findings revealed extensive evidence of professional-grade editing software being used to alter my voice patterns, facial expressions, and the audio quality of the security camera recordings. What we're seeing here is not the work of an amateur, Dr. Harrison explained to Eleanor during a confidential briefing. This level of digital manipulation requires expensive software technical expertise and significant time investment. Someone paid professionals to create this distortion, which suggests premeditation and conspiracy rather than a family member simply sharing concerning behavior. More importantly, Dr. Harrison's investigation into Jake's online activities had uncovered evidence of the financial desperation and addictive behaviors that were driving his systematic destruction of our family. Bank records showed massive gambling losses, undisclosed debt from failed cryptocurrency investments, and payments to social media manipulation services that artificially inflated his follower count and engagement. Your son isn't just manipulating family relationships, Dr. Harrison told me during my first meeting after being released from the hospital. He's running a sophisticated influence operation designed to monetize his victim narrative while destroying anyone who might expose his actual character and financial situation. As I sat in Eleanor's guest room that night, still weak from the heart attack, but mentally clearer than I had been in months, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Arthur's death, a cold professional determination to expose the truth, regardless of the personal cost. Jake had made a critical error in his eagerness to destroy me completely. In creating such an elaborate and public campaign, he had also created a documented trail of sophisticated manipulation that could be analyzed and exposed by experts who understood exactly what he was doing. The war for my dignity and Arthur's memory was about to enter its final phase. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I had weapons that could match Jake's sophisticated arsenal of lies. My recovery from the heart attack had been slow but transformative, giving me not just physical strength, but a clarity of purpose I hadn't possessed since Arthur's death. Eleanor's support network had grown into a formidable legal team, and through careful investigation, we had discovered an emergency account Arthur had established years ago that Jake knew nothing about. Combined with donations from former clients who had followed my story, I finally had the resources to mount a proper legal counterattack. I hired 3 of the most respected professionals in their fields: Margaret Torres, a renowned elder law attorney who specialized in family fraud cases; Dr. James Harrison, the cyber forensics expert, who had already begun analyzing Jake's digital manipulation techniques; and Robert Chen, an aggressive defamation attorney whose reputation for destroying false narratives was legendary. Together, we launched a massive federal civil and criminal lawsuit against Jake and Davies for elder abuse fraud, conspiracy, and national defamation. The case immediately attracted global attention, not just because of the viral nature of Jake's previous campaigns, but because it represented a new frontier in combating sophisticated elder abuse, facilitated by social media manipulation. The trial began on a crisp November morning, with the courthouse packed to capacity and cameras broadcasting the proceedings worldwide. As I walked into that courtroom, supported by Eleanor and my legal team, I felt the weight of every senior citizen who had been silenced, manipulated, or financially exploited by family members. This wasn't just about my vindication. It was about exposing a new form of elder abuse that preyed on society's assumptions about aging and competence. Jake entered the courtroom with his usual confidence, surrounded by a smaller legal team, and still maintaining his public persona as the wrong son seeking justice. He had no idea what was coming. None of them did. When Margaret Torres stood to present our opening evidence, the courtroom fell into an expectant silence. "Your Honor," she said, her voice carrying the authority of decades of experience, "we have video and audio evidence that will demonstrate the systematic psychological warfare conducted against Patricia Peterson by individuals who exploited her love to commit serious crimes against her person, her reputation, and her financial security." The first security camera footage began to play on the large screens positioned around the courtroom. The timestamp showed a date from 3 years ago during one of Jake's rare visits to our home, when Arthur was already showing early signs of cognitive decline. Jake's voice, clear and unmistakable, filled the courtroom as he confronted Arthur about the will. "You're losing your mind, old man," Jake said, his voice dripping with calculated cruelty. "Mom's got you completely wrapped around her finger, hasn't she? Making you think I'm some kind of failure when I'm the only one in this family with any real ambition." The footage showed Arthur confused and distressed, trying to defend me, while Jake systematically undermined his confidence and planted seeds of doubt about my motivations. "She's using you, Arthur. She's always been manipulative, always controlling. You're too sick to see it now, but she's poisoning you against me to protect her precious Mark and Lisa." But the most damaging evidence came from recordings captured just weeks before Arthur's death, when Jake made one of his final visits to our home. The hidden cameras revealed him explicitly discussing his financial desperation and his plans to contest the will. "I'm drowning in $250,000 of gambling debt," Jake told someone on his phone, believing he was alone in Arthur's study. These online crypto investments were supposed to be guaranteed returns, but the whole thing was a scam. "I need that inheritance money, and I need it fast." The conversation continued with chilling calculation. "The old man's completely out of it now. Mom's doing everything she can to cover it up, but he's basically a vegetable. If I can prove she was manipulating him during his decline, I can contest the will and get my hands on that $4 million estate." Most devastating of all was the footage showing Jake coaching someone over the phone about how to manipulate his children's testimony. Ethan's 17 now, old enough to understand the stakes. Jake said, his voice cold and strategic, "Tell him that Grandma Patricia has been lying about our family for years, that she's the reason his grandfather cut me out of the will. Make sure he understands that supporting me means protecting his future inheritance." The courtroom was completely silent as these recordings played, the only sound being the occasional gasp from spectators who were witnessing the systematic destruction of a family by one of its own members. Jake's face had gone white, his confident posture crumbling as his own words condemned him before the world. When Davies was called to testify, confronted with undeniable video evidence of his participation in the conspiracy, his professional facade completely collapsed. "He threatened to destroy my practice if I didn't help him," Davies sobbed on the witness stand, his reputation and career disintegrating in real time. Jake said Patricia was just a bitter old woman who deserved what was coming to her. "He convinced me that we were protecting him from an abusive mother, not destroying an innocent woman." Davies's confession opened the floodgates for other co-conspirators to reveal their roles in Jake's elaborate scheme. The social media manipulation services, the bribed hospital staff, the compromised journalists who had spread Jake's false narratives, all of them came forward to confess their participation in what prosecutors characterized as one of the most sophisticated elder abuse cases in recent history. When Jake was finally called to testify in his own defense, the transformation was shocking and complete. The confident influencer who had entered the courtroom was gone, replaced by someone who appeared to be having a complete psychological breakdown. Confronted with hours of his own recorded words and the testimony of his co-conspirators, Jake's carefully constructed public persona shattered entirely. I never meant for it to go this far." He stammered, his voice barely audible as tears streamed down his face. "I was desperate. The gambling debts, the failed investments, I was going to lose everything. I thought if I could just get the inheritance money, I could fix everything and make it right." But as more evidence was presented, Jake's composure completely disintegrated. He began sobbing uncontrollably, his body shaking, as the full magnitude of his crimes was laid bare for the world to see. "I destroyed my own family," he wailed, his voice breaking. "I turned my children against their grandmother. I made them hate the woman who saved my life when I was young." The sight of his complete collapse was both vindicating and heartbreaking. This was my son, the child I had nursed through illnesses and protected from the consequences of his worst choices, reduced to a broken shell of his former self. I felt no joy in his suffering, only a profound sadness that it had come to this. Mark and Lisa, who had been required to attend the trial as potential witnesses, sat in the gallery, watching their brother's destruction with horror and dawning comprehension. As the evidence mounted and Jake's lies were systematically exposed, they began to understand the magnitude of their own complicity in my suffering. I watched as Mark buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Lisa sat beside him, tears streaming down her face as she realized how completely she had been manipulated into abandoning her own mother. They looked at me across the courtroom, their eyes filled with immense remorse and a silent plea for forgiveness. But neither approached me, understanding that the chasm they had helped create would take time and tremendous effort to bridge. When the judge finally called for recess after Jake's complete breakdown, the courtroom was filled with a heavy silence. Everyone present had witnessed something profound and disturbing, the complete destruction of a man who had chosen greed and manipulation over love and family loyalty. As I sat in the witness waiting room, supported by Eleanor and my legal team, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over 2 years, the profound relief that comes from having the truth finally heard and believed. The evidence was overwhelming. Jake's guilt was undeniable, and my vindication was complete. But even in that moment of triumph, I couldn't forget that this victory had come at an enormous cost. My family was shattered, my son was facing years in prison, and my grandchildren would grow up knowing that their father had systematically tried to destroy their grandmother for money. The truth had finally prevailed, but the price of that truth would echo through our family for generations to come. The verdict came after 3 days of deliberation, delivered by Judge Margaret Foster, with the weight and gravity that such a comprehensive case of elder abuse deserved. The courtroom was packed with spectators, media representatives, and advocates for elder rights who had been following the trial as a landmark case in family fraud prosecution. The evidence presented in this case, Judge Foster declared her voice ringing with moral authority, reveals a pattern of elder abuse so systematic, so calculated, and so cruel that it represents one of the most disturbing examples of familial betrayal this court has ever encountered. The defendant, Jake Peterson, orchestrated a sophisticated campaign designed not only to defraud his mother financially, but to destroy her mentally, emotionally, and socially. Jake was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison for elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy, and defamation. His sentence was enhanced due to the sophisticated nature of his crimes and the extensive use of social media and digital manipulation to harm his victim. Davies received 7 years and was permanently disbarred, his legal career destroyed by his participation in what the judge called a conspiracy that perverted the legal system for personal gain. The financial restitution was comprehensive and decisive. Jake was ordered to return every penny he had stolen or received through his fraudulent activities, the proceeds from my home's forced sale, my liquidated retirement accounts, the donations his followers had sent him, and the revenue from his monetized social media content about our family dispute. Additionally, he was ordered to pay $500,000 in punitive damages for the emotional distress and reputation damage he had caused. But beyond the financial restoration, the court issued something even more precious to me: complete vindication of my character and professional integrity. Judge Foster's written opinion was a scathing condemnation of Jake's actions and a comprehensive restoration of my reputation. Patricia Peterson, the judge wrote, represents the best qualities of professional excellence and personal integrity. She devoted her career to protecting others through ethical communication practices, and she dedicated her personal life to protecting her family, often at enormous personal cost. The abuse she suffered represents not just a crime against an individual, but an attack on the fundamental values of respect, honesty, and filial duty that hold families and communities together. The legal vindication felt like a physical weight lifting from my shoulders. After 2 years of being portrayed as a mentally unstable, manipulative woman, the legal system had formally recognized not only my innocence, but my exemplary character. My professional reputation was fully restored, and several organizations that had distanced themselves during the controversy publicly apologized and offered to reinstate my memberships and honors. From prison, Jake sent me a letter that revealed the true depths of his psychological and financial ruin. His handwriting was shaky and erratic, his thoughts scattered and desperate. "Mom," he wrote, "I know I have no right to ask for anything from you, but I'm begging for your forgiveness. The gambling addiction, the failed investments, the constant pressure from creditors, it drove me to a place where I couldn't think clearly. I convinced myself that you were the enemy, that taking your money was somehow justified by old grievances, that I had blown completely out of proportion." The letter continued for several pages, detailing his mounting debts that still exceeded $300,000 even after his conviction, his complete isolation from family and friends, and his growing understanding of the magnitude of what he had destroyed. "I see now what I really am," he wrote. "I'm not a victim or a truth teller or someone fighting for justice. I'm just a criminal who destroyed the woman who loved me most in the world." Reading his letter, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was satisfaction in seeing justice served, but also genuine grief for the son I had lost to his own greed and desperation. I had never wanted to destroy Jake. I had simply wanted the truth to be known and my dignity restored. Mark and Lisa's journey back to our family was more hopeful but equally complex. They sought me out privately after the trial, approaching me with the humility of people who finally understood the magnitude of their betrayal. "Mom," Mark said, his voice breaking, as he struggled to find words adequate to his shame, "I don't know how to apologize for what we did to you. Jake convinced us that supporting him was protecting our family, but we were just too cowardly to think for ourselves or question his story." Lisa was even more direct in her remorse. "I abandoned you when you needed me most," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I chose comfort and avoidance over courage and love. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want to spend whatever time I have left making amends for the pain I caused." Their path to reconciliation was slow and careful, built on honest acknowledgement of their failures, rather than excuses or justifications. Mark entered therapy to understand how he had been manipulated and why he had chosen to believe Jake's lies over his own knowledge of my character. Lisa threw herself into learning about elder abuse and family manipulation, becoming an advocate herself as a way of making amends for her complicity. Arthur's will was formally upheld and executed according to his true wishes. The $4 million estate was distributed to Mark and Lisa, as Arthur had intended, with specific provisions for my grandchildren's education and future security. More importantly, Arthur's memory was cleared of any suggestion that he had been manipulated, or that his final decisions were anything other than the thoughtful choices of a man who understood his family's dynamics perfectly. My grandchildren's healing journey was perhaps the most delicate and important aspect of our family's reconstruction. Ethan and Chloe, now 19 and 17, had spent their teenage years as unwitting weapons in their father's campaign against me. The revelation of how they had been manipulated was traumatic, but it also opened the door to authentic relationship building based on truth rather than lies. Grandma Patricia, Ethan said, during one of our first conversations after the trial. "I'm so sorry for the things I said about you. Dad convinced me that you were the problem, that you were trying to steal our future. I never questioned whether he was telling the truth because I wanted to believe him." Chloe struggled more with the complex emotions of love, betrayal, and guilt. "I feel like I don't know who anyone really is anymore," she confided during one of our garden walks. "If Dad could lie about you, how do I know what else in our family was fake?" Through family therapy and patient conversation, we began building relationships based on honesty, mutual respect, and genuine affection. I shared stories about their father's childhood, helping them understand that Jake hadn't always been the manipulative person he became. I also told them about their grandfather Arthur's true character and the love he had felt for all of us, even in his confusion during his final illness. The victory was complete, but it was also bittersweet. My integrity had been restored, my financial security was rebuilt, and my relationships with Mark, Lisa, and my grandchildren were growing stronger every day. Arthur's legacy was protected and honored, and Jake's conspiracy had been exposed and punished. But the cost had been enormous. Years of my life had been stolen, my health had been damaged, and my family had been shattered in ways that would take years to fully heal. Most painfully, Jake remained isolated and broken, serving as a reminder of how greed and desperation could transform love into destruction. As I sat in my restored home that first evening after the trial, concluded surrounded by family photographs that had been returned to me and legal documents that vindicated my character, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Arthur's death: profound peace. The truth had finally triumphed, but the journey had taught me that justice, while necessary, couldn't undo all the damage that lies and manipulation could cause. What it could do was provide a foundation for rebuilding a solid ground of honesty and mutual respect on which authentic relationships could slowly be constructed. 3 years after the trial that restored my reputation and dignity, I find myself living a life I never could have imagined during those dark months of isolation and despair. My home meticulously restored with the restitution money and filled once again with the warmth of family connection has become not just my sanctuary, but a gathering place for a family rebuilt on foundations of truth and mutual respect. The house buzzes with a different kind of energy, now one that comes from relationships that have been tested by fire and emerged stronger. Mark visits every Sunday with his wife and children, bringing stories from his work as a counselor for families affected by financial fraud. He has transformed his guilt and shame into purpose, using his experience to help others recognize the warning signs of manipulation and familial exploitation. "Mom," he told me recently as we worked together in the garden, "Arthur had loved. I think about every day how close we came to losing each other forever." Jake's lies were convincing because I wanted to believe them, because taking his side was easier than confronting difficult truths about our family. I'll never forgive myself for that cowardice. Mark's commitment to making amends goes beyond words. He has donated his entire inheritance from Arthur to organizations that support elder abuse victims, keeping only what was necessary to secure his children's education. His transformation from passive complicity to active advocacy has become one of the most meaningful aspects of our family's healing. Lisa's journey back to our relationship has been even more profound. She has become my closest companion and confidant, someone who understands the depth of what we lost and the preciousness of what we've regained. We spend hours together each week, sharing stories, planning family gatherings, and simply enjoying the peace that comes from authentic connection. I wasted so many years being afraid of conflict, avoiding difficult conversations. Lisa reflected during one of our evening walks. I chose comfort over courage, and it nearly cost us everything. But maybe that's what makes our relationship so precious now. We know how easily it can be lost, so we never take it for granted. Lisa has taken on the role of family historian, carefully documenting our real story and creating photo albums and memory books that capture the truth of our relationships rather than the distorted narratives Jake had created. She interviews elderly family members about their memories of our family history, ensuring that future generations will understand their heritage through authentic rather than manipulated stories. My grandchildren, now 22 and 20, have grown into thoughtful young adults who understand the complexity of love, loyalty, and truth in ways that most people their age never have to confront. Ethan, studying psychology at university, often speaks about his experience as a victim of parental manipulation and how it has shaped his understanding of family dynamics. What Dad did to our family taught me that love and manipulation can look very similar from the inside, Ethan explained during a recent family dinner. It's taught me to always question my assumptions and to value honesty even when it's uncomfortable. Chloe has channeled her experience into creative writing, crafting stories about family relationships and the importance of authentic communication. She often seeks my advice about her work, asking for my perspective as someone who understands both the power of narrative and the importance of truth in storytelling. "Grandma," she said recently, "I want to write stories that help people recognize manipulation when they see it, but I also want to show that families can heal from even the worst betrayals if everyone commits to honesty and hard work." Jake remains in prison, serving his sentence in relative isolation. I receive occasional letters from him, each one showing slightly more self-awareness, but also revealing the depth of his psychological damage. The gambling addiction that drove his initial desperation has been replaced by a different kind of desperation, the need to be forgiven and readmitted to a family he systematically destroyed. "I dream about Sunday dinners," he wrote in his most recent letter. "I dream about being part of the family again, about sitting around your table and hearing everyone laugh. But then I wake up and remember that I'm the one who destroyed all of that. I'm the one who turned my children against their grandmother and convinced my siblings to abandon their mother." His letters are heartbreaking in their honesty, but they also serve as a reminder of the irreversible consequences that can result from choosing greed over family loyalty. I respond to his letters with compassion, but without false hope. Some betrayals are so complete that they cannot be undone, only accepted and learned from. Davies has faded into obscurity, his legal career destroyed, and his reputation permanently tainted by his participation in elder abuse. His fate serves as a warning to other professionals who might be tempted to participate in schemes that exploit vulnerable elderly people for financial gain. But perhaps the most meaningful transformation in my life has been my emergence as a national advocate for elder abuse prevention and ethical family communication. My story has become a powerful tool for educating people about the sophisticated tactics that financial predators use against elderly family members. I speak at conferences across the country, sharing my experience with law enforcement officials, social workers, and families who are dealing with similar situations. My memoir, The Truth Will Set You Free, A Mother's Fight Against Family Fraud, has become a bestseller and resource guide for other abuse survivors. Eleanor and I founded the Patricia Peterson Foundation for Elder Justice, which provides legal assistance and emotional support for seniors facing financial exploitation by family members. We work with a network of attorneys, investigators, and therapists who specialize in these complex cases, offering hope to people who thought they had no recourse against sophisticated manipulation. What happened to you could happen to anyone, I tell audiences during my speaking engagements. Intelligence, education, professional success, loving family relationships, none of these things protect you from predators who understand how to exploit trust and manipulate perception. But there is always hope, and there are always people willing to fight for justice if you have the courage to seek help. The work is demanding but deeply fulfilling. Every letter I receive from someone who found the courage to fight back against family manipulation, every successful case our foundation helps support, every family that reunites after being torn apart by lies and greed, reminds me that my suffering was not meaningless. My days are full and purposeful in ways I never expected after such trauma. Mornings are often spent responding to correspondence from abuse survivors or consulting with attorneys on complex elder abuse cases. Afternoons might find me working in Arthur's garden, which has become a meditation space where I process the complex emotions that still arise from my journey. Evenings belong to my family. Mark, Lisa, and my grandchildren gather regularly for dinners that are filled with laughter, honest conversation, and the deep contentment that comes from relationships built on truth rather than convenience or obligation. As I look back on the journey from my lowest point in that homeless shelter to this life of purpose and authentic connection, I am struck by the resilience of the human spirit and the power of truth to ultimately prevail. The trauma I experienced will always be part of my story, but it no longer defines me. Instead, it has become the foundation for a deeper understanding of justice, compassion, and the importance of fighting for what is right, even when the cost seems unbearable. 5 years have passed since that devastating day when Jake's lies first shattered my world. And as I sit in my garden this evening, watching my grandchildren help prepare dinner, while Mark and Lisa plan our upcoming family vacation, I am overwhelmed by the profound transformation that suffering can create when it's met with unwavering commitment to truth and justice. My home radiates with the warmth of genuine family connection, rebuilt on a foundation of honesty rather than convenience or fear. The laughter that fills these rooms now carries a deeper resonance because it's been earned through struggle, forgiveness, and the hard work of authentic relationship building. Arthur's presence is felt everywhere, not as a source of grief, but as a reminder of the love and integrity that ultimately guided our family back to each other. The work I do now, helping other elderly victims of family fraud and financial exploitation, has given my later years a purpose I never anticipated. Through our foundation, we have assisted over 2,000 families in recognizing and combating elder abuse, recovered millions of dollars in stolen assets, and changed legislation in 8 states to better protect vulnerable seniors from sophisticated manipulation tactics. My story has become a beacon of hope for those who thought justice was impossible proof that even the most calculated and comprehensive betrayal can be overcome through courage, truth, and the support of people who believe in justice. But more than professional vindication, I have discovered the profound peace that comes from living authentically surrounded by people who love me for who I truly am, rather than what I can provide them. The lesson I carry from this journey reaches far deeper than simple strategies for protecting oneself from financial predators. I learned that our greatest strength lies not in avoiding conflict or maintaining false peace, but in having the courage to confront deception whenever we encounter it. Self-worth is indeed an unshakable foundation that no one can take from us without our permission, and true family bonds are built on love, respect, and mutual support rather than fear, obligation, or financial dependency. I carry no bitterness toward Jake or the pain he caused. Bitterness would only poison the peace I have fought so hard to achieve and the relationships I have worked so carefully to rebuild. Instead, I have transformed my deepest trauma into lasting purpose, becoming an advocate for justice and dignity for those who cannot fight for themselves. To anyone listening who may be facing their own family betrayal, who feels isolated and gaslit by those who should protect them, I want you to know this. Your voice matters. Your dignity has value. And there are people who will stand with you when you find the courage to seek truth and justice. The path may be long and the cost may be high, but it leads to something infinitely precious. A life lived with integrity, authentic relationships built on honesty, and the profound peace that comes from knowing you never compromised your values, even in your darkest hour. That kind of peace earned through struggle and sacrifice becomes a legacy worth leaving for those who come after us.